Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries all around the world. All right, it's time to catch up with Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst, and all the political stories of the day. Can't keep track, so I'm going to focus on a news that broke yesterday. Just get your take on kind of what it means for tariffs going forward. And that's that potential 25% tariff on any nation that's going to buy oil from Venezuela. How does something like that work? This throws like a whole new confusing layer on who and what can be tariffed.
Yeah, so there's generally like 5 or 6 ways that tariffs can be put on place. And for the purposes of today's discussion, what you need to know is essentially that most of them require an investigation. You know, President Trump does have the authority to put tariffs on day one, that moment, via the internet, via Emergency Economic Act. But, you know, this case with the Venezuelan oil tariff, I would just say is that this falls more into the former, where there's most likely going to be an investigation. And I think that's what most investors should prepare for on April 2nd, Liberation Day, is that, look, there is something likely coming on April 2nd that's going to take place that moment, that day. President Trump has really, really hyped this up. But I also would just call out that a lot of this just follows that normal pattern of there's going to be an announcement and then there's going to be an investigation. Because for a lot of this that could potentially be challenged in the courts, that investigation is crucial to make sure that these tariffs are sticking going forward.
So you're kind of bursting the bubble a little bit there for Liberation Day there, Nathan. So you're not thinking we're going to see a lot of highlights or fireworks?
No, so, you know, Bloomberg News did some great reporting over the weekend where essentially they said that a lot of the broad potential tariffs, think of like just pure reciprocal tariffs, has sort of been dialed back, and they're looking more at sector-specific tariffs. And, you know, the sectors that we're looking at and we're telling our clients right now, automobiles. President Trump has been talking significantly a lot over the last couple of weeks in terms of the lack of American automobiles in Europe and, you know, subsequently, other European, just this U.S., Mexico, Canada relationships in terms of the automobile supply chains, but also pharmaceuticals. So what we think will happen is on April 2nd is you will see some tariffs go in. They may be sector specific. President Trump even just alluded that automobiles could be in the next couple of days. But then you're also going to see large announcements of investigations potentially on broad tariffs like 15, 20% on a country. But that investigation will just continue to go further down the line and then be subject to additional negotiation.
So here's something I'll give you some insight into an editorial meeting that we're having and discussion that we're having towards booking for television on April 2nd. Be really cool to talk to some companies that like may be in the crosshairs and like, hey, how are you preparing? How are you doing? We have no idea how to book it. Like we can understand like what sectors might be in the crosshairs, but in reality, and which might be exposed, are they European companies? Are they U.S. companies? Are they Asian companies? Like how would you go about trying to craft an understanding of like who to talk to on the C-suite lines?
You know, this is one of the biggest, most difficult questions. I mean, I have an alert catcher on my terminal that is set up for tariff news, and I'm getting a news article every 6 to 8 minutes, and many of it is contradictory. But I think what the base case scenario here is this idea that President Trump's going to make a statement, and then for many of the options, if you will, the idea is that there's going to be an investigation, there's going to be another kick the can. So I think what I would tell a company to do is, look, prepare for the worst case scenario, meaning that day you're going to have to deal with a 15% tariff. But the more likely scenario is that you're going to see a statement, you're going to see a market reaction, headline risk, and then you're going to get probably about 30 days to figure out, okay, if this tariff actually moves forward, how are we going to react? Or if there's a subsequent decline or a walk back, how are we going to react? The unfortunate thing is that the news cycle is changing by the hour, and there's only one person that ultimately decides how these tariffs are going to go forward, and it's President Trump.
I don't even know how to set up an alert catcher on my Bloomberg.
You don't?
No. So
okay.
Nathan's way ahead of me here.
Combo.
Nathan, Congress, I understand they're back in session maybe 3 weeks before their Easter break. God forbid they go too long. Can they get anything done in the next 3 weeks?
No, I don't think so. I mean, what Speaker Johnson has really told his caucus is that they want to figure out and get the ball moving on this $4.6 trillion tax extension bill that is due by the end of the year. And so over the next 3 weeks, what we're telling our clients is expect some headlines to come out, maybe in terms of SALT deduction, maybe in terms of Inflation Reduction Act, and maybe in terms of cutting Medicaid, because that's what the House committees are trying to do, is figure out is how are you going to pay for this $4.6 trillion deal. Now, I don't think they're going to be able to get there because this is extremely complex. Even just a few moments ago, Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama said, look, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't want to cut Medicaid. 3 out of 5 children in my state rely on Medicaid. I don't want to cut it. So if you can't cut Medicaid, then you're going to take a lot of the tax, a lot of the revenue for this tax extension out of that discussion. So I think what they're going to do is you're going to see these headlines, you're going to see additional debates, but I think ultimately the Republicans are going to need a little bit more time to figure out how to pay for this tax bill.
Right, which also then begs the question that if you were looking at, healthcare companies that have exposure to Medicaid, like same question, no idea which ones then are going to get impacted more if you don't know what that policy is going to be. Okay, so with all of that uncertainty, what is certain right now from policy perspective?
Well, deregulation is certainly continuing to take place. I mean, just later this week, we have a Senate Banking Committee hearing with Paul Atkins, former commissioner, to be the chairman of the SEC, and then Jonathan Gold to be the next comptroller of the currency. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury, came out just last week and said, look, we're going to take over the financial regulatory process, and we're going to move things in terms of stress testing, maybe changes to the enhanced supplementary leverage ratio. So if you're a bank investor, for a perspective, there's a lot of sentiment about deregulation, and that deregulation is going to come. Now, specifics are going to come a little bit later, but probably within the next year, you're going to be in a much better regulatory environment than you are today. So there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes. The problem is that for the biggest two items that the markets care about, which is tariffs and taxes, tariffs, unfortunately for the market, really just relies on one person. And then the tax reform debate, that just takes a lot more time, and you're going to get clarity later this year. I do think Congress is going to be able to do something on taxes, but it's going to be very difficult to come up with the specifics until maybe May or June of this year.
And Nathan, I think kind of in a related story, Boeing seeks to withdraw its 737 MAX guilty plea. That's according to the Wall Street Journal, thinking that maybe the Trump administration might be more lenient. Is that a sense that corporate America, or is that an expectation you think corporate America should have?
We've actually seen this from other companies as well, this idea that, maybe the regulators or the enforcers aren't going to be enough or as tough. Now, I can't speak to the Boeing case because I haven't looked at it, but if you compare it to like what's going on over the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, when DOJ came in and they essentially gutted the agency, a lot of those banks and a lot of those companies that are operating or under the jurisdiction of the CFPB just said, look, our enforcement risk has just declined dramatically because even though the regulations are still on the books, we would just say that, who's going to enforce us on this? Now, I'm paraphrasing what they would be thinking. But in terms of the courts, I would just say the courts are still the courts. And, the courts didn't change via the election. Now, the courts over the last couple of years have been really gearing away from more towards a pro-business environment, and that could be in their calculations. But I would just say that, the political, apparatus in Washington has certainly changed, and I would anticipate companies to change that as a result of that.
All right, Nathan, thanks a lot. We really appreciate Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst, joining us on all the things in D.C.